Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Learning Love Podcast. I'm Dr. Mark A. Hicks, author of the book Learning Love. Love can be practical, tangible, and a realistic life for everyone, regardless of your relationship experiences so far. So thank you for joining me as we spend some time learning love. Love is the answer. Now all we have to do is explore all the questions. And today's question is, why do I always call love a learned skill set? In my book, I describe love as a learned skill set. Anyone can learn and practice the 5 components of love in order to create healthy, happy, thriving relationships. But someone asked me recently, why do you say it's a skill set? Because isn't it inherent? Is it not an innate part of our life as human beings that we are born with the ability to love? And yes, we are. That's absolutely true. It is an innate ability as humans to love. And so, in that way, yes, we are born with it, yet it is still a learned skill set. That's why we can be born with it and not use it, not see it lived out. That's why we don't have the life of love in our life, our families, our world that we want and need and deserve. We don't have the practice of love because we haven't practiced the skill set, even though we have the innate ability. So let me see if I can illustrate how this works. When we were born with certain abilities, certain innate things that we could do. Now, assuming you were born with a healthy body, and I know this analogy breaks down because not everyone was, but assuming you were born with a healthy body, you were born with the ability to move yourself through walking and or running to get from one place to another. That is an innate ability that we have, assuming you were born with a healthy body. Everyone who is born with a healthy body can do that. That's what we have the ability to do. Our legs are formed that way. We have the ability to walk upright. Not every animal does, but the human animal has that ability. We can walk upright. We can propel ourselves forward. Our legs are strong enough to carry us. We have the ability to balance, and there's a whole balancing mechanism in our body in order to move ourselves forward, walking or running. That's an innate ability. We're born with it. And yet, you have to learn it. You still have to learn how to walk. It takes a little while. You have to try. You see other people doing this and you learn to pull yourself up. You learn to take a step or two here and there. You fall down a lot. You probably have someone in your life who holds your hands as a little toddler and you waddle a little bit, you move your legs, you learn how to balance, you learn how to hold on to those hands and move yourself forward walking, and everyone claps and praises you as a small child because you can do that. And eventually, after a lot of falling down, after a lot of trying and failing, after a lot of attempts, you take a few steps on your own. You learn how to do it. And the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. And then as you get bigger, you get stronger, you get more accustomed to walking, you develop the ability to run. At first, it's kind of a quick waddle as a small toddler, but you eventually learn how to run and move yourself forward much faster. These are innate, inborn abilities for human beings, and yet you still have to learn them. But because you learned them so young, you don't even remember learning them. As small children, you don't remember learning to walk. We don't remember that. That's not something we have a knowledge of how we learned it. We just learned it. And so it feels very natural. We just did it. We don't remember all the work it took as toddlers. We don't remember all those falls. We don't remember all that stumbling. It just was something we naturally learned. And then, as we get older, maybe you want to learn to run faster. You might want to play sports. You might want to run track or play soccer or baseball or football or basketball, whatever the sport is. You want to learn how to run, and that takes another learning process. Yes, it comes natural, and yet, especially if you're a track star, you have learned significant aspects of running. How to place your feet, how to hold your body, additional lessons in balance, the proper strides. All these things are details that have to be learned in order to be elite at something that comes natural. That if we are going to walk and run, yeah, that's easy enough if we have a healthy body. But if we're going to be good at it, there's things to learn. If we're going to really enjoy that sport, then we're going to need to learn other aspects of how to do something that our bodies were naturally made to do. We learn the components of it in order to thrive in that ability. Now, love is the same way. Yes, we were born with the innate, inborn, natural ability to love. That's part of being human. And yet, we learned how. We learned it from our families. And if you were born into a healthy family, you learned quite a lot before you even knew you learned it. You learned it as an infant, as a small child, as a toddler. Before you even remember learning it, you learned how to love, at least much about it. Just like you learned how to walk and you learned how to run before you ever remember how you learned it. It just is something we learn as children if we were born into a healthy family. And yet, even as we get older and we get into the game of love ourselves, there are things we may need to learn. We didn't necessarily learn everything from our family, just like we didn't learn everything from our family about walking or running, especially if we're involved in sports. We may have other aspects we need to learn to run at an elite level. If we want to have elite relationships, we're going to need to learn more than what our family taught us because no family's perfect. Even the healthy ones have their quirks, have their oddities. They're a little weird. All families are like that. And it's okay. It's fine to be odd and quirky and weird. That's part of the charm, but it doesn't necessarily work in other relationships outside of that family. There's other aspects to learn. And so, in order to have thriving relationships throughout our life, with a spouse or partner, with family, with friends, with community, with coworkers, we have to learn all the components of love, not all of which were necessarily taught in our family. It's a learned skill set. It comes from an innate ability, but just like walking and running, you can learn the basics before you even know how you learned it, but there are still things to learn if we're going to thrive. If we're going to truly live a life of love in every area, there are still things to learn. Now, this idea that it's innate isn't a bad idea, but it does hold a lot of people back. We just assume love is natural. We assume that it just happens, that we don't have to work at it. It's just something that happens because we're human and we know how to love and we came from a good family. So, what's to learn? And that's why so many people struggle in relationships. They're just doing what their family did that may have worked just fine for that family, but that family was a cohesive unit. It wasn't the whole world. Everybody is not part of that family and therefore doesn't think the same way, doesn't react the same way, doesn't know how to be in relationship the same way. And so if we're going to have friendships, we're going to have marriages, we're going to have partners, we're going to have co-workers, communities, organizations, then we're going to have to learn to deal with more than just our family. So what we learned in our family can be very valuable, but it's not complete. And then there are those families that it was not valuable, those dysfunctional families that actually taught us bad habits in relationships, actually taught us what not to do in relationships. And we have to relearn a lot of things. We have to overcome some bad habits in our relationships because of what we learned from our families. So while we have the innate ability to love, we may have not even learned it as a child. We may have learned very little about love from our dysfunctional family. And that's exactly why it's such good news to know that it's a learned skill set. Sure, it's easier if you learn to walk as a child, but if you don't have that ability because of some physical problem, or maybe you lost the ability because of an accident, with physical therapy, many people can learn to walk again. They learn the components of what it takes to walk. They learn to send those signals from their brain into their bodies to move their legs. They learn how to move those muscles and build up that strength in their legs. They learn how to hold their feet and move their ankles. They learn how to balance. Those are all learned skill sets that can be developed with the help of a physical therapist, even if somebody has lost the ability to walk. Again, the analogy breaks down because it doesn't work that way every time in physical life. But for many people, they have learned to walk again, despite the problems, the struggles, the accident that took away their ability, or the physical problems that caused them to not be able to learn it naturally as a toddler. We can learn the components of what it means to walk and learn to walk again. It's more difficult as an adult to learn to walk than it was as a toddler, but it can be done. And so if we learned a lot about love from our families, then we have a head start. But it doesn't mean we know everything about love in the world, with friends, with our own spouse or partner, with coworkers. We don't know how to have relationships with them just because we had a good relationship in our family. We have more to learn if we're going to have healthy, happy, thriving relationships. And if we didn't learn it as a child, if we've lost the ability somehow through tragedy, through heartache, we can still learn to love. It takes some help. It takes some training. It takes learning the components of love, but we can still learn it and develop the practice that teaches us how to be in healthy relationships, even if we didn't learn it as a child, even if it's been ripped away from us as an adult. We can still learn the components of love, put them into practice, and have healthy relationships. And so, yes, it's an innate ability, but it still is a learned skill set. We have the basic ability as human beings, but we have to put it into practice. Yes, it's easier if we learn all this as a child, but no one really learns all of it as a child because every family falls short of being perfect. And we need to know all 5 components of love. Most families will teach you 2 or 3 or maybe 4. Very rarely do you get all 5 in one family. There's still something to learn. And maybe coming out of a dysfunctional family, you need to learn all 5. That's okay. Learn them. Put them into practice. Because love is a learned skill set. It's an innate ability. It's a God-given natural ability for human beings to be able to love. But the reason we don't, the reason we struggle, is because we fail to understand it's a learned skill set. We learn the 5 components of love. Take a look at my website, markahicks.com. Have a basic, very brief rundown there. Get my book, Learning Love. You have a detailed teaching of what the 5 components are in that book. Learn what they are and how to practice them. And regardless of your background, regardless of what you've been through, you can learn to live a life of love. Yes, you have the innate ability, but you don't necessarily know how to use it and live it out in a happy, healthy, thriving way until you learn the skill set of love. Thank you for joining me on the Learning Love podcast. If you're ready to build your life of healthy, happy, thriving relationships, I encourage you to get my book, Learning Love, Building a Life That Matters and Healthy Relationships That Last. It's available at Amazon, and you can find easy links on my website, markahicks.com. And remember, love is the answer. Now all we have to do is explore all the questions. Love well, everyone.